Welcome to the Legal Academy, Episode 3. I'm your host, Orin Kerr. I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Lawsky, a professor of law at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. Sarah has been a professor at several law schools. We met as law professors, colleagues at George Washington University. And then Sarah then went on to UC Irvine and now Northwestern. And she is a tax professor by background and also has a PhD in philosophy relatively recently, has been an associate dean in various capacities, has also is probably most famous in the law professor world for her entry-level hiring statistics. So I'm really just thrilled to welcome Sarah to the show. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much, Orin. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. So let's start with what you are best known for, your entry-level hiring report at Prof's blog, the Law Professor blog that many of us visit. You've been keeping these numbers for, I think, maybe 10 years, something like that.
10 years.
And a lot of law professors rely on them. A lot of candidates rely on your numbers to try to get a sense of what's going on in the entry-level hiring. So market. So I'm hoping you can just talk about the numbers and why you collect this information, what you've learned, and what trends might be over time.
Thanks. So first, let me give two caveats. The first caveat is this is not a full report of all entry-level hires. An organization like the AALS would have to do that. They don't do it. I wish they would. I know that I am missing people, and I don't know whether the people that I'm missing from the report are randomly sort of a random sampling of candidates, or if I'm missing some group of candidates disproportionately. So that's the first caveat. I had Alexander Tsesis in 2013, I believe, did a check where he actually called every law school to see who their entry-level hires were. And I think I got in the mid-80s. So it's not terrible, but I am very cautious of drawing any absolute conclusions from it because I know I'm missing people. And so the absolute numbers, I'm not so, I don't want to fixate too much on them. I may be missing some group of people systematically. I'm aware of that.
Okay.
My second caveat is that the report is only tenure track faculty at U.S. law schools. The spreadsheet includes anyone who wants to report. I will put anyone, but at the very beginning, I made the decision that I was only going to collect the data on tenure track faculty getting entry-level positions at U.S. law schools. I'm not sure I would make the same decision now, but because I'm interested in seeing changes over time, I stuck with that decision because it was the decision I made early on. I think whether that was a defensible decision is maybe another conversation, but that is so I'm willing to talk about trends in entry-level hiring of tenure-track professors at U.S. law schools. That's sort of what if we're going to get any information out of the report, I think it's, at best, that's what it is. So what kind of trends? Increasingly credentialed. That's the biggest trend. People are increasingly credentialed. Entry-level hires are increasingly credentialed. And you can see that in the percentage of people who have PhDs. In the last few years, around 50% of the hires have PhDs. That's a really significant increase from when I started doing this report. About 1/3 of the candidates have a fellowship and a higher degree and a clerkship. So those are the three credentials that I look at. We're now up to a little over 1/3 of people have all three of those, which is, again, way up from the beginning. And that's a lot of credentials. So those are the two main things that I take from this, is that people are very credentialed and increasingly so.
And so does that translate into advice for entry-level candidates or want to be entry-level candidates? Is it, I mean, when people come to you and say, you've tabulated all these great numbers, I really want to be a law professor, I have my JD and I wrote my student note, what should I do? Like, do you have kind of a takeaway piece of advice to give?
Almost everyone who is hired has a fellowship or a PhD or both, like north of 90%. I believe this year it was 92%. And what that largely reflects is the very high percentage of people who have fellowships, north of 80% this year and the last few years. So as a starter, I think a fellowship has almost become a sine qua non of getting this job, which there's a lot to be said about whether that's a good thing or not, but that just without any value judgment, that does seem to be realistically what's happening. So that's one thing. I would never, so almost always I would say to someone, well, you should get a fellowship.
Okay.
Just because, not in a normative sense they should get a fellowship, just looking at what I see, almost everybody has a fellowship or a PhD. I would never recommend that somebody get a PhD, unless that's like their deepest desire.
Having recently obtained one yourself, right?
Not ever be a recommendation I would make unless that's like a driving passion. But so that would not be a recommendation, though. Of course, if someone wants to get a PhD, that's wonderful, and they should very, very good time. But I think that's a step too far as a recommendation. But the reality of it is that almost everyone who's hired has a fellowship.
And I'm gonna ask you to go behind the numbers here, which is to the normative question that you mentioned. Do you have a sense of whether that's good or bad? I mean, I share your view that it's almost to the point now where I think schools doing entry-level hiring are just kind of assuming if you're serious, you're going to have a fellowship. Like,
yes.
They want to see some sort of academic thing that shows you're not just like an associate at a law firm who is thinking, I'm not going to make partner, let me become a law professor instead. Mm-hmm. And so they are looking, and maybe in the past that was like you wrote something while you were an associate and that showed your interest in academia or something. But now it does seem like that's kind of become like the signal of seriousness that you want to devote your career to this.
That's an interesting
good
question,
or bad?
actually. Which is, the question is, what function is the fellowship playing? And I don't know the answer. So one function could be that it's a signal that signals that you're serious. Another function could be that a fellowship provides time to write and guidance about how to write so that people who go through a fellowship are more published. Another possibility is that fellowships give people access to people who are very effective lobbyers who will effectively lobby for them. I don't know, and I would imagine all of these things are at play and probably some I haven't thought of. So I'm not sure exactly what role the fellowship is playing. Some combination of those things and maybe other things I haven't thought of. But I do think there are a lot of possible explanations for why so many people have fellowships. And the other thing I would say is we don't know how many people with fellowships get jobs. So we know that almost everybody who gets a job has a fellowship, but we, I think, can say with some confidence that not everybody who has a fellowship gets a job. So it would be very helpful to know the base rate here. We could imagine a situation, this is not the situation, but we could certainly imagine a situation where there were so many people with fellowships that actually it turned out that even with a fellowship, it was a very long shot to get an entry-level hiring job. You can make that number as big as you want. Now, I don't have access to that base rate. Only the AALS has access to that through the FAR forms, which capture almost everyone, not every single person, but almost everyone is on the market puts in one of those FAR forms. And that would be an easy analysis for them to do. No one is allowed to use the FAR forms for research, so I can't do that analysis. But I think that's an important question when people are thinking about whether to get a fellowship, which is, well, conditional on having a fellowship, what's the chance that I'm going to get a job? And of course, it's different for different fellowships as well. But I just wanted to add that. Like, I think it's hard. I would recommend a fellowship, but that certainly doesn't mean in any sense that if they get a fellowship, then they will get a job.
Right. It's always funny, I think, giving advice in legal academia where in a lot of ways it seems like the big hurdle is just the entry-level hire because tenure rates tend to be quite high.
Yes.
And so it makes some sense that there would be kind of a lead up to the moment when people go on the entry-level market rather than just sort of a casual step toward the entry-level market, which
Right.
in a lot of ways, when I was just going back now almost 20 years, that was kind of what a lot of people did, right? It'd just be like, let's just do an ALS, fill out the form and see what happens. And it makes sense given the significance of that moment that there would be more to it. But it does just seem like this huge shift, which has not gotten quite the examination that it required.
I would be fantastic if somebody, I feel, I'm moderately competent at collecting data. I'm pretty good at Excel. In terms of the sort of sociology of what's going on with the hiring, that's not something that I do. But I would love to read about that if somebody wants to sort of write a history of how this shifted. Now, I don't think it's outrageous. So think about how other academics in other fields get their jobs. If you look at the amount of time that it takes a law professor, what a law professor has to do. So one of the things I look at is how many years since graduation. And it's most people are out between, I don't even remember what my range is. I think it's like 5 to 15 or something like that, or 5 to 10. I can't remember. But the point is, they've been out for a little while. And when you think about what other people have to do in academia to get jobs, what people have to do is they go to college. We all go to college too. Then they go to graduate school. And graduate school is like 5 to
15.
5 to 20, like 5 to 8 years long. And then after graduate school, they often get postdocs. So when people say, well, you go to law school, why should you have to get a fellowship? In some sense, you're kind of playing out the same length of time and the same amount of preparation that somebody in another field plays out. Additionally, English graduate school prepares you to be an academic. Law school does not necessarily prepare you to be an academic. So I think it's not totally outrageous that there would be some expectation beyond law school for someone who wanted to be a legal academic if what they're going to do is produce academic work, because it makes sense that there would be some extra training needed for that and some time for the person to mature in terms of what they're writing and what their research agenda is. Now, I think there's a larger question here, which I probably we shouldn't delve into, which is whether legal scholarship is a discipline in that sense, whether there is whether that type of training is really needed to produce legal scholarship. And I think that would be the sort of counter to the idea of, well, people spend 8 years preparing to be English professors. Well, maybe there's something different about what English professors are producing and what law professors are producing.
So I want to get to that, and I'm going to turn to questions about scholarship in a second. But I did, before we turn to the scholarship question, I did want to ask you about your comment on the role of PhDs. So you sort of, you rolled your eyes a little bit and don't get a PhD.
No, I didn't say don't get a PhD. Getting a PhD was, for me, the single most rewarding intellectual experience of my life. It was fantastic. It was incredibly hard, but it was incredibly worthwhile. I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to do that. I worked with an amazing group of people at UC Irvine at the Department of Logic and Philosophy of Science. It was a wonderful experience. So if that's something that someone wants to do, yes. I mean, it was fantastic. It also made me feel like I had something that I was bringing to legal scholarship that I didn't feel like I was able to bring before. I really felt like I got some deeper knowledge in an area. What I was saying was, I would never say that someone who didn't want to get a PhD should get a PhD because they think it will get them a job as an entry-level law professor. That is a step too far, as it were. But no, I loved getting a PhD. I'm not rolling my eyes at the thought that someone would get a PhD. For me, it was a fantastic experience. Very hard, but very great. I just mean that I wouldn't tell someone who isn't separately motivated to get a PhD to go out and do that. That's all I meant.
Fair enough. So I wanted to turn now directly to the scholarship question. In the 2 episodes I've had before this with Akhil Amar and Jamal Green, they were both constitutional law generalists, and there was a somewhat of a commonality in terms of their view of the world. Focus on the Supreme Court, focus on public law, and by contrast, you're a tax professor and you practice tax as an associate, and you have an LLM in tax, and you've written in tax. I was hoping, I really want to sort of understand the world of tax scholarship and how the world looks from a tax perspective. I mean, you hear the con law people, and I think you said you heard the other 2 episodes. How is tax law scholarship different from the kind of public law, con law world that we've heard about so far?
I think tax scholarship covers an incredibly broad range of scholarship. I think that's a big difference. When you say what is tax scholarship? What does a tax professor write? It's such an incredibly wide range. You'll hear a common saying among, I don't know who said this originally, it's a common saying among tax professors. I don't know if it's a common saying among other people. Tax is applied distributive justice. And you can write about the applied part, you can write about the distributive justice part, and everything in between. So you could have a tax professor who's basically writing philosophy. So my degree, let me say as a side note, my degree is in philosophy, but it's actually in formal logic. So I always get a little nervous when people say, your degree is in philosophy. I say, let me make something clear. I don't know. I know very little about Kant, as my graduate school F, also known as a B+, in that required core class reflects. I'm not that kind of philosopher. I'm another kind, more on the logician side. But there are people writing like regular type philosophy in tax scholarship. There are people writing pieces that might be classified as doctrinal, but because tax law is so difficult that you really can have a tax professor writing what maybe in another area would be, I sometimes feel like doctrinal is denigrating the scholarship, and I don't think anyone would say that the people who write what might be classified as doctrinal, I mean, some of these people are absolutely the leading tax scholars in the country, I mean, no question, to people writing things that look more almost like white papers for think tanks. I mean, it's just, and everything in between. It's an incredibly wide range of types of scholarship and types of scholars, so it's a really exciting group to be part of, because you go to a tax conference or and it's like there's everything there. There's really, I mean, the unifying thing is obviously all of us, I think I can say this without exception, all of us really enjoy reading and thinking about the Internal Revenue Code as a really complicated and exciting and rich area of study, and then how that is implemented in scholarship just covers an incredibly wide range.
And so, how is the path towards being an academic different for tax law professors?
I could give you a very database answer to that, because I've actually looked at this for myself because I was curious about that exact question. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking, but I can tell you.
I'd be happy to hear
which is
both.
More of us have advanced degrees, but more of those advanced degrees are LLMs. I think a lot of tax professors have tax LLMs. Fewer of us have clerkships, and fewer of us have PhDs. And it does actually look quite different. I ran it for a number of different areas, and tax people really do look different as a group. And maybe that's changing over time, but I don't think so. So I think part of this is the classes that a tax professor is called upon to teach are for the most part not the kind of class that anyone can just sort of pick up with a little bit of study. And so if you're going to come in and be a tax professor, you have to, not always, this isn't 100% true. There are certainly people who come in, well, I was going to say there's people who come in without having been a tax lawyer, without being super immersed in the code in the same way, but those people are largely economists who have an incredibly good understanding of another aspect of how tax law is implemented. So they have a very technical approach as well. It may not be, and it's certainly anchored in the tax law. They just may not, just coming from a different perspective. But there has to really be some pretty significant doctrinal knowledge before someone's going to go be a tax professor, because you're going to teach basic tax, which can get in the weeds pretty quickly, basic tax. But then you're going to, if they're really hiring you as a tax professor, you're going to have to teach some other tax class, and corporate tax, international tax, partnership tax. These things are getting very technical very quickly. So tax people come in with a really solid knowledge of tax. Not every single person, and I can think of exceptions to that, people who are really important members of the tax community and really wonderful scholars. So this is not every single person, but usually there's some other kind of technical knowledge that they bring, whether that's some kind of policy-related technical knowledge or economics technical knowledge or something along those lines. So that, I think the kinds of classes that people are asked to teach are so technical.
It does seem, as a non-tax person myself, this comes up a lot in hiring when there's a tax spot. I think the non-tax professors sort of we scratch our heads. We're like, okay, we have to hire someone to tax. Who's good at tax? And then it's like, whew, wow, that's, we kind of feel like, at least I have felt, I'm really not in a great position to answer that question, and I will ask friends of mine who's good, and I may have asked you that question before, but how should the non-tax professors who may, we don't have this specialized knowledge, right? So as you're saying, like, to be in the field, it seems it requires this really solid doctrinal knowledge that is difficult to come by. It takes a lot of time to learn this stuff. Those of us that don't have that background, how should we go about looking, especially to hire colleagues that do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I want to get to that, but I want to sort of point out something that this raises about the legal academy, which is law professors are expected to know as you think about hiring someone, we're kind of expected to know, or we're treated as if we know something about every area of law. And that's interesting. I'm not aware of another field where someone is expected to know every area. Now, I can tell you from, however specialized the area, people are more specialized than that, right? So I can tell you from my time in graduate school, you can get pretty narrow. You can say, okay, now we're going to just have a logic seminar where every week someone just comes in and presents a paper about logic, formal logic. And I will tell you that even with a room full of specialists about formal logic, whoever comes in knows so much about whatever the thing is that they're presenting that at least some of the people in the room, sort of, the first slide is okay. I've definitely heard people say that. I understood the first slide. So I don't want to pretend like in other areas, everybody has this super, has the expertise of whoever is presenting. But there is something a little different about the law where we are expected to be able to evaluate every kind of scholarship. And I certainly feel totally unqualified to evaluate many kinds of scholarship. I think it depends on what. It's tough. I mean, I think this is true as well for not just for non-tax people evaluating tax papers, but for anyone evaluating any area that's not their area.
Yeah, I think if it's an extreme case of a common problem in academia, which is that we're hiring people in fields we don't understand to teach classes we don't understand, and we're asked to assess who's good.
Yep.
And it's like, how do you do that?
I know.
I find this, and I'll even lay my cards on the table a little more. I even find with, I'm a criminal procedure person, as you know. Even within criminal law and procedure, it's splintered into so many different pieces that there are parts of it where I'm like,
but I would hope that that's true. I would actually hope that that's true, because as academics, we have the luxury of developing our expertise in some area, and practitioners know so much, at least in tax. I have a tremendous amount of respect for practitioners, and there's a lot of back and forth between practitioners and scholars in tax, and it is incredibly rewarding. The thing that academics have that practitioners don't is the time and luxury to investigate whatever it is we are interested at great depth. And so I would hope that anyone who comes in knows more about whatever they're presenting about than pretty much everybody else in the room. That's like the best case scenario. But then how do you evaluate that, right? So I don't know. I mean, one way is to talk to people who are experts, who are experts and have them read the paper. I think another way is to, I can try my very hardest to understand the paper and come up with genuine questions that I have to help me understand the paper. Not questions like, this is more of a comment than a question, not that kind of question.
What does this have to do with Fourth Amendment law?
Yeah, real questions. Like, I really don't, I try to figure out what is the thing I don't understand, and if the thing I don't understand is conceptual, I ask about it. Because often that will give me, first of all, some inroad into the paper. Sometimes if something is jumping out at me as not making any sense, sometimes it's because it doesn't make any sense. And actually listening to the person try to justify this thing that turns out to be maybe a common assumption in their field, but actually, why is that a common assumption, can be useful. But more often, just asking it gives me more access to understanding the paper. It allows them to explain something that it can be rewarding to hear someone explain something, that is, maybe difficult area. Sometimes it helps people make the paper clear to others outside. So I try to read something and figure out why I don't understand it, and then try to ask a real question that will help me with my comprehension. And often that is fruitful for me, and I hope sometimes for the person who wrote the paper as well. Evaluating people's scholarship is super important. It's not the only thing, and also it's not just the quality of the scholarship, but what kind of law school do you want to be? Do you want to be the kind of law school where, or what balance do you want to have, right? We're the kind of law school that only hires people who are asking the big questions. I'm not saying this is any particular law school. I'm just saying, in theory, imagine a law school that said, we are a law school that is only hiring people who are asking the big questions. We're not interested in a paper, even a paper that builds on doctrine. We're not interested in a paper that looks at the details of the code. We just want people to answer the big questions. Okay? Then that's not about quality. That's about the kind of law school you want to be. Or maybe you say, on this faculty already, we have a couple people who are looking at the big questions, and then we have these other people who are doing this. We need some people with a different, different approach to scholarship to mix things up. So I think that kind of thing, probably I'm qualified to figure out whether it's the kind of scholarship that would balance the faculty, or that the kind of faculty that the faculty values.
It sounds like some of the things you're saying about tax scholarship, in some ways it sounds a little bit like a throwback to an earlier era of exploring a very difficult, important doctrinal area of law. Getting it doctrinally right can be a significant accomplishment that is of value to the community. Talking to practitioners, where some of the best people who know the most, who maybe could be academics if they wanted to be, are partners at law firms and are the leading members of the bar, and that's a significant. That's significant in and of itself. It sounds a little bit, and I've never thought of tax law scholarship this way. So for me, this is really helpful if I'm understanding your take correctly. It sounds a little bit like there are at least ways of approaching tax law scholarship that are kind of traditional ways of thinking about legal scholarship.
I think so, and I think partly it's because tax law is so hard that it remains a very rich area of study, and there will always be technical aspects, especially because it changes, and it changes drastically. I mean, the 2017 Tax Act really changed things, and because it's so complex, you can change one thing and then all of a sudden a lot of things change, right? So you drop the corporate tax rate and you throw in a deduction for flow-through entities, basically. We definitely don't need to go into the details of that here. But suffice it to say, you do these two things and some other things, and all of a sudden, a pretty settled question, which is what kind of entity should I form, is like a totally different answer now. And it takes people a while to figure out what that answer is, and academics can help figure that out. To me, it would be very strange if, given that my area of study is the law, and it is a complex code that I study, it would be very strange if I did not think that practitioners who think about this all day did not have a lot to add to what I'm doing. Of course, they're tremendously knowledgeable about this. In some ways it's a throwback. I think of there's a lot of tax professors who publish some pieces in law reviews and publish some pieces, and sometimes it's a 50-50 mix, in tax notes, tax notes is a wonderful, really, really important, I don't know, what is it, magazine or journal, I'm not sure how to quite characterize it, but it's incredibly important, and I think that probably the best way to characterize it is as something for practitioners, but if not practitioners, people who are involved in the practicalities of the tax law. Many tax professors publish in tax notes because it's really important. People want to get their ideas out there. People want to affect what the law is, and it's a very, very complicated, ever-changing area of the law.
And how does it look from the standpoint of a tax professor in terms of the different audiences? So you've got tax notes, which I gather may be a way of talking to leading members of the bar. And then I guess there's the tax law review. There are a couple specialty journals.
Yep.
And then there are general law reviews. How does the world, take me through kind of how you might think about what to do with an article you're writing in terms of whether you're trying to put it in one or the other. And I realize, student edited law reviews may be hard because the students don't understand. If professors don't understand, students it's even harder. How do you think about that choice?
I think it, as with so many things, it is, what is your goal in this particular moment, right? So sometimes the goal will be, this is a piece I want to get out to practitioners. It's really important for me that they see this. This is an insight that maybe because I have the luxury of time, may not be something they have time to explore, but I feel like this would be a useful thing for practitioners or for people writing legislation, right? So that's, sometimes there's if you're pre-tenure, people looking at you for tenure may not understand the significance of publishing one place or another, or may feel that a practitioner-oriented piece is not the kind of thing they want to consider for tenure. Then you're going to have to try to place your piece in a student-edited law journal, and sometimes that will be a great experience. I've had wonderful experiences publishing in student-edited law journals. The students massively improved the article. So it's not a bad thing, it's just you're going to pitch the piece a little differently. Or the kind of piece that's going to end up in a student-edited law journal might be a different kind of piece than is going to end up in tax law review or Florida tax review. These are these, these are peer edited journals where you get and for me, peer edited isn't, the significance there is partly about the selection process, but partly it's about the fact that once the piece is accepted, you're working with a colleague who's massively, who is very kindly spending a lot of their time helping you improve your piece. And sometimes that's really, really something that you really want, right? So I just think it depends on the piece. It depends on where you are in your career. It depends on what audience you want to reach. I don't think there's any sort of one-size-fits-all answer. You have to think carefully about what is the piece and what are my goals right now, both with this piece and just more generally.
Really interesting. Thanks. I wanted to turn to the issue of visiting professorships and moving schools. You have been at 3 schools, as have I, and we overlapped at 1. And you've done, I think, was it 1 visit or maybe more than?
One visit, yes.
1 visit at UVA.
No, sorry. I did 2 visits. One of them was at Northwestern, where I then ended up. So, okay. And then the other one was at UVA. So I was at GW, and then I visited for a year at UVA. Then I was at UCI. I visited for a semester at Northwestern, and now I'm at Northwestern.
Okay, great. So part of that is reflecting what is one way in which legal academia works, which can variously be called writing your way up, or however people call it different things. But other schools are looking to hire lateral candidates, so you get hired at an entry level, and then you kind of may be interested in looking at other schools. Do you have a sense of whether that market effectively in law professors, especially the lateral market, does that strike you as like a rational, sensible system, or do you look at it as especially having experienced it and think like, how could the world possibly work this way?
It's not a great system. It's not a system. I mean, let's not use the word system. There's no system here, right? So let's not say it's a great system. It is the way that the law professors get hired. I'm not a fan of the concept of visits. I understand that there are certain advantages to them. I think they are far outweighed by the inconvenience of look-see visits. I can certainly see why someone might want to visit at another school and why a school might want someone to visit. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the idea of the look-see visit. I'm not a fan of that. You do not need a semester or a year to figure out whether you're going to hire someone. You just don't. And I mean, there's just no way. And it is, at some schools, I think, a de facto requirement, and it does not affect all people equally. It is much, much more difficult to the point of being unworkable for people with families, especially women with families, but anyone with a family. Not, or I say family, and I think family usually means like kids, but also, even if you have a partner, is what's your partner going to do? Is your partner like moving to wherever? You're going to be apart for a year? I think when you look at the disadvantages and the imposition, it's just not outweighed by whatever tiny benefit. And I think sometimes it's used as a way to put off making a decision. Well, we might want to hire this person, we might not. Let's have them come in for a visit. No. So I just think that's it's not necessary, and it is a huge, it's a huge imposition. And so that not so good. I don't know how, setting aside visits, I don't know how the way that lateral moves work in legal academia compares to the way the lateral moves work in other parts of academia, or for that matter, the way people getting new jobs works in other fields. So I don't know. I don't have like some idea in mind of the best way to do lateral hiring. The only thing I kind of strongly think visits not so much, but yeah.
Yeah, it does seem that schools, at least some schools I'm familiar with, have moved away from requiring the visit. And I did 2 visits earlier, and I shared that sense that it's a really tough way of trying to. It's so hard on the candidate, and it strikes me as it's something that for the school that's hiring, sure, it's great. They get like another person to come in to teach, and they, as you say, can kind of defer these decisions as to who to hire, and it's kind of like job talks where it creates an impression for the hiring school that this is not actually a high stress moment for the candidate. It's just normal academia, right? It's like, oh, someone has come through presenting a paper. Of course, for the candidate, that's their job talk, right? Their entire career is on the line. For the school, it's like, oh, somebody presented a paper. And so it's almost like the hiring process seems to sort of cater to the hiring school, creating a sense of normalcy, like this isn't so hard on the candidate, to the expense of the candidate who is suffering through it on the other side. And I think I know of some schools that have moved away from it for that reason. I think in a lot of ways, because of the gendered effects of the visit requirement, there's still some of, and also just of parents and those with families who can't do that kind of move. And you'd mentioned you sort of thought that you just can't learn. You don't learn that much in a semester visit.
There's not enough information about what are you learning? So I guess you're not really learning about their scholarship because you read all their scholarship before, and they're giving a job talk anyway, right? You can't learn about what kind of you really can't learn about what kind of institutional citizen they'll be, because they're not doing any committee work, and they are massively incentivized to show up to things. Right? I mean, you understand that it's a semester, a year-long job interview. So it would be a very strange decision not to show up to all the workshops and all, but you're not learning anything about the information about what happens after the person is hired. You're just learning about rational behavior, knowing that you're being considered for a job. Are you learning about like whether the person is good at going out to lunch? You're probably learning about whether the person is good at going out to lunch. You are having many more tests of that skill. I'm not sure that's a skill we should be hiring on. I mean, maybe you're a law school who wants to hire on the skill of going out to lunch. Okay, and I can actually see that. But I feel like that's not enough. Maybe just have them in for a week or 2 weeks even, and go out to a lot of lunches and see how it goes. But I don't think you need a semester of going out to lunch.
Yeah. The best argument I've heard for having a semester visit is you get to figure out if the person asks good workshop questions, because there would be like a whole bunch of workshops, and then they can ask a whole bunch of different questions.
So let me ask the question. I've heard that too, and here's the thing. If that is making the marginal difference in whether you hire a person, that's maybe not so great, right? If that's the marginal difference. So I'm trying to figure out whether to hire this person. It's completely in equipoise. The thing that is going to decide this is whether at 5 workshops they asked, 3 snappy questions. I don't know. For me, this is not persuasive because it's got to make the marginal difference, right? I mean, so I'm not moved by that argument, but I don't know. It depends on what the culture of the school is. If that is considered the most important thing about what kind of workshop questions the person asks, then I will accept that is what they should be looking for, and maybe that needs a long visit, or maybe you could just have them come for 3 weeks and come to 3 workshops and ask 3 snappy questions. I don't know. Maybe there might be other ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I share your sense as well on the especially with a lateral hire. I think the easiest way to find out about whether somebody's a good institutional citizen or ask good workshop questions is to ask their current colleagues.
Yes, I mean, there may be other sources of information.
Find out the answer. a lot better that way. So I wanted to end on the question of institutional roles. Speaking of people that are good institutional players, you have been an associate dean in various capacities now at, I think, 2 different schools. Yep. And this is a choice that a lot of faculty face post-tenure. They're at a school, they're tenured, and then they're being asked, do you want to play a role in the institutional apparatus of the law school? Some people have ambitions to be deans. Other people just want to be good service members of the faculty and play various associate.
And other people really like the job. Or so this actually goes back to an earlier part of the discussion, which is you're going to notice if you look across all these law schools, like who's the associate dean for curriculum? Like disproportionately, it's tax people, because what does the associate dean for curriculum do? The associate dean for curriculum has to know all the ABA rules, has to know everyone's schedule, and has to do the blocks. I mean, I'll tell you, I was associate dean for curriculum. I will talk. I mean, I made this spreadsheet that is like no joke, and it is. I am so proud of this spreadsheet, which I'm not associate dean for curriculum anymore, so it doesn't get any play. But basically, I would tell the spreadsheet. I had all of this information. I had the historical enrollments for every class going back 15 years. I had cross-referenced, so it knew for any class that I would put in, it knew how many people on the faculty taught that class. And then I would tell it, I want you to look back, and then I would tell it the maximum size of the class, so I could decide, do we cap it at 70, or do we do it by classroom? Maximum size of the class, tell it how many sections was my minimum number of sections. So for some classes I want to teach it 2 semesters. I would tell it how many years back I wanted it to check, and then it would tell me how many sections of the class I needed, because it would look at the mean and it would look at the mean and the median number of students in the class. It would give me both of those. It would tell me how many sections I needed, and it would tell me how many professors I had that taught that and whether I was short any professors and therefore needed to find a visitor.
You are a very valuable member of any law faculty.
So I'm just saying, like, who likes to do that kind of thing? Tax professors like to do that kind of thing. We love that stuff. So, like, you might want to be associate dean because you want to be a good community member, or you might want to be associate dean because, like, you get so much data and you just have to ask for it. You're like, can I have all of the information about enrollment going back 15 years? And they're like, absolutely yes. I mean, are you kidding me? Sometimes I get bored and I have to go on the internet and just find data and do stuff with it, but they're going to, like, give me all the data. So, you know, it's like a really fun job if you're let's just say, it's the kind of thing one likes if one likes that kind of thing. Right?
Fair enough. Now, have all of your associate dean positions been of that kind, or were there some that you took on because you thought, I'm going to be a good institutional citizen?
No, so I got to be associate dean for curriculum essentially twice, and then I got to be associate dean for finance for a year, and I was like in hog heaven. It was amazing, right? Because that is just, you know, forget it about being tied to classes. That's just numbers, right? So I was very, very happy. Again, just spreadsheets galore, and I worked with a wonderful a colleague who does finance at the law school. She's amazing, and I learned a lot from her. I learned a lot about Excel from her. She's Amy Post. She is top notch. But that was like fantastic. So, I mean, it's not that I have some sort of second order desire to be a good institutional citizen. I just love this stuff. It's super fun, and then, you know, I want to do as good a job as I can once I'm doing it. And I will acknowledge it's not all spreadsheets. It's not all spreadsheets. You also have to talk to humans, and I try to do a good job at that too. And I actually find that stuff fun as well, because I really I like thinking about teaching a lot. I love thinking about teaching. I love being a teacher. I'm a third generation teacher, and that means a lot to me. You know, and that's, you know, you're thinking about teaching. Who should teach this? Who should teach that? How do I balance students' schedules to make sure they have a range of different styles of teacher? Or so it's a really super fun job if you like that kind of thing. And there's a reason a lot of tax professors do it.
One question that job raises that you alluded to is, you know, who should teach what? And one question that comes up is, you know, some professors may be very successful in certain classes, and some professors may be unsuccessful in some classes, and there may be professors that are not all that successful in any classes. And so if I don't know how you deal with this in your spreadsheet, but I'm also kind of interested in the broader question: what do schools do when they've got some faculty members that are fabulous teachers, some which are good in some classes, and others which maybe just they're just not awesome classroom teachers?
I mean, everybody's got to teach. You know, if someone's not great at teaching, they still have to teach. That's their job. So I just try. You think it's always about the balancing. Are they going to be the only person teaching a section of that, or is there going to be someone else also teaching a section? Right? Can there be trade-offs? You know, you say someone's a bad teacher. So one of the things I looked at is, you know, I like to. You know, teaching evaluation numbers are deeply problematic in many ways, and we do not have 6 hours to discuss all the ways that they're problematic. The one thing that they're good for is finding people who are way outliers, and it almost never finds them. So I know we don't have, I really should not get into this. Okay, we're gonna have to change the subject because I can feel like a long discussion of Z-scores coming on. So let's just bracket that. Let's not talk about
aside. It's a great topic, though. I want your take on it.
We'll talk again sometime about it. I'm not going to talk about teaching evaluations. That is really that's not going to be good. We got to move on now. But I think it's about balance. And I think what I was going to say before things almost went really not in a good direction, interesting, but just too far in a direction. What I was going to say was, if somebody is such a bad teacher that they can't be in the classroom, there are various ways that you catch that, and then you have to have them not be in the classroom. But when we say that people aren't good teachers, usually we're talking within a range of acceptable teaching, right? I'm not talking about people who shouldn't be in the classroom. There aren't very many people like that, right, in law school. So then it's just a matter of balancing. And somebody who may be not a good teacher for one kind of student, other types of students may love that person. So you also want to sort of keep an eye out for that, right? Some students may actually prefer that professor. So I think it's all about balancing and giving students choices to the extent you can give them choices. And remembering that different students have different preferences, that even though stories about a professor can sort of coalesce in one way, that's actually not everybody's lived experience. So just trying to sort of balance all of those things. And look, as you say, some people are not so good at one kind of class and they're fantastic someone at another kind of class. Someone may not be a great large class teacher, but be a fantastic seminar teacher, or vice versa, right? So you try to look for people's strengths and help support them in their strengths and help them, be the best sort of version of a teacher that they can be in the area of their strengths.
Great. And I wanted to come a little bit back to the question of teacher evaluations.
Yeah, I feel like you're trying to provoke me, and as my students know, I am very easy to provoke. I
good.
can provoke all kinds of rants. So I just want you to know, go into this with your eyes open. That's all I'm saying. Go into this with your eyes open. All right. You can ask the question, but it's on you then.
Happy to do so. So,
all right.
I mean, I think that the studies have suggested, and it resonates with the experience I've seen of various faculties, that there are serious problems with teacher evaluations based on gender, based on race. There are a lot of students who are just making judgments based on these illegitimate factors, and they're really going into the mix of at least the numbers and also comments, certain types of comments that come up again and again based on gender and race that are clearly coming from non-academic parts of the student reaction. So what role should schools have for teacher evaluations given that? And I assume you're accepting that sort of critique, and if you don't,
I don't think there's any question about that critique. I mean, the research there's so much research on this topic that I think that we've just moved beyond discussing that, right? I mean, there's no question. This is as close to established as something can be. That there is bias for gender, there is bias for race, there is bias for age, there is bias for physical attractiveness. None of these are things that I need to have information about on student evaluations. If students are evaluating based on any of those factors, that's just not useful information for me as the consumer of evaluations. So what are students good at evaluating? Students are really good at evaluating their student experience. And we should ask them about their student experience. I want to know what the student's experience is like in the classroom. That is only a portion of whether someone is a good teacher. It is an important thing, but it's not the only thing. Luckily, there's a tremendous amount of scholarship and study in this area. There's many places. Minnesota has a good department that's looked extensively at that. So if we take teaching evaluations as a way to find out what student experience is in the classroom, I totally support them. However, student evaluations should not be made public. That is a huge problem. And they should, right now at many law schools, both the numbers and the comments are made public. And what has ended up happening is that students view them as basically Yelp reviews, where they're writing to other students who want to take the class. So why are they made public? Well, they might be made public so that students can find out what kind of exam there is, or how heavy the reading is. So you know what an even more efficient way is for them to find that out? Is, have professors post their syllabus. This is an incredibly efficient way for them to get the same information that does not involve teaching evaluations. Maybe students say, well, I need to know which classes to steer clear of because I need to know if this person is biased against a certain group of students. Well, you know what? If someone is biased against certain groups of students, you know whose job that is? It's not the student's job to avoid that person. It is the academic dean's job to read those evaluations and say, hey, this is not good. They have to go talk. You have to go talk to the person. You have to help figure out what happened. I'm not saying that every statement in a teaching evaluation that says someone has a particular form of bias is accurate, but I don't have to take it as accurate because I'm not using it to judge the person. I'm using it to get information that creates a further conversation, or I try to figure out what happened in the classroom. Was there some kind of misunderstanding? Is there something that could change in the way that something small that could change that would help students have a different kind of experience? Is there a big problem? Do I need to step in? Is there actually a big problem? Is the problem so big that the person shouldn't be teaching this class, but maybe they can teach another? That's not the student's job to steer clear of the problems. It's the administration's job to step in and affirmatively change. So I think student evaluations are important. I do not think that and let me say another thing. If I need to find out whether someone's a bad teacher, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to either find an objective way to measure quality of teaching, or I'm going to take colleagues, and I'm going to send them into that person's classroom every semester. And I think that should be happening anyway. We should have peer evaluations of teaching. So there's lots of ways to get this information, but using the numbers as providing information about anything other than whether the person is male or female, white, black, Asian, indigenous, I mean, like, that's all it's telling me. Are they physically attractive, right? Do they make me laugh? These are all good, I don't know, I don't care, right? I'm trying to get good instructors. I'm not trying to have the students, have their, if they have certain preferences. I'm not trying to cater to those preferences that those have not to do with education or biases that don't have to do with education. And frankly, like the most important thing is not whether they had a rollicking laugh every day of class, right? My job is to, although if they did, it's not like bad. I'm just saying my job is to make sure that they learn. That should be the job of teaching, right? Watch Netflix for entertainment. So I think they're important. I want to know about the students' experience in class, what their subjective experience was. It's tremendously important. It helps the administration help teachers improve. But publishing them and relying on the numbers, not so much.
Yeah, if I understand the history of it too, that this was the idea of having teacher evaluations and sort of making them important to a professor's tenure file or whatever it may be, was originally kind of a 60s, 70s, like where we're being responsive finally to the customer. We're recognizing the importance of the student experience, and we're not saying we're the, we are the royalty of the law school and you are the servants, and we're trying to recognize the importance of the student experience. And then ironically, it turns out that at least some of that data ends up being data that's not quite measuring what we thought.
I think the problem is that if you use it as quantitative information as opposed to qualitative guidance, right? So right now I feel like it's one way. It appears to look like the numbers. We can take means, we can take medians. Like, I'm the first person. Give me some numbers. I'm going to do some means and medians, and can't stop me. But once you have numbers, people feel like you're learning something real, right? But you might not be learning anything real. I absolutely think that there should be teaching evaluations, but I think they should be recognized for what they are, which is part of an ongoing conversation among students, faculty, and administrators about how professors can be the most effective teachers possible and treat their students with respect. It should be part of a larger conversation. It's not like it shouldn't be like a grade. The student gives the professor a grade, right? That's not, that is then we get to have like a GPA. This is not the right way to use them. But of course, it's tremendously important to get student feedback. But as part of a larger ongoing work and conversation that will take work on the side of the faculty and the administration and the students, all working together to try to improve the learning experience.
And one slight variation on this that I wanted to end on, I completely share your sense of the role of evaluations in terms of improving teaching and to be really wary of the numbers and all the biases that are in them. One place that this can come out, though, is in the context of making a hire of, for example, a lateral hire who has a certain set of teaching evaluations, where you don't necessarily know the context. You can't really go and see the person teaching except for the job talk, which has its own problems.
Yeah, that's its own problems.
So you get a lateral candidate, and students in particular say, we want a really good teacher, and of course you want good teachers on your faculty, and we've talked about the difficulty of evaluating scholarship. How do you, given all of these biases,
this is a real conundrum, and
how do you measure that?
I worry more. I mean, the fact that they're used actually worries me more, because having now read, because when a part of my job when I was associate dean, was it part of my job? I don't know if it was part of my job. One of the things I did when I was associate dean is every year I was associate dean, I read every single teaching evaluation for every single class in the entire law school. Thousands of pages of teaching evaluations every semester. I have read a lot of teaching evaluations, and I've done some sort of really qualitative analysis looking at how frequently certain words are used in different if a certain word is used, what's the probability given that word that the person is male or female, that the person is old or young, and I can tell you, woof, that is, yikes. Okay, so it really worries me that they're used in hiring. It really, really worries me. So how do you figure out if someone is a good teacher? Okay, like maybe this is the strongest argument for a visit, right? Because then you find out to some extent, right? Have someone go sit in the classroom. I don't know, but I already said I don't like visits, and I'm willing to stay committed to that view. Maybe you have a short visit and have them teach a short class, right? So this is, have a 2-week visit, and you can teach a short class over 2 weeks. You can teach a 1-unit class over 2 weeks. And actually, I've seen this quite a bit, actually, that students kind of like that. They like taking a class for 1 unit that lasts, a week or two. Have them come visit during a J term or something like that. So I think the way you do it is you see them teach and you observe. And recognizing that the observer, too, is going to be subject to the same biases as anyone, right? And trying to think about that and be careful about what one's own reactions and what you're responding to, and are you responding to the teaching, or are you responding to other things about the person? Maybe that's a solution. But I think relying on saying, well, we need to evaluate the teaching and we have no other options, so we're going to rely on these evaluations. That's not a good way, because we know that there's systematic bias.
Sarah, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Orin. Thanks so much for having me.
Great.
All right, take care.
Take care.